Awesome. Well, here we are with Martin McPhilimey for a breath-to-breath interview. It's our fifth one, and I could not be more excited because we've got a solid science background to really ask some great questions. So without that, let me introduce Martin McPhilimey is an accredited and experienced respiratory and sleep scientist, exercise physiologist, behavioral science practitioner, coach, and mentor. With his qualifications, passions, and 15 years of experience in research, clinical work, and training, Martin's mission is to create a world of high-performing individuals with healthy minds and bodies. And then just a little bit of how you even got to where you are now with Performance Through Health, which was the brainchild from a 2017, something that I'm going to ask you about, finally launched in 2019, and then 2021 took it full time. So definitely a lot there that I would love to unpack, but without further ado, thank you so much. Thank you so much for letting me ask you some questions from South Carolina. And I believe you're in Indonesia. Is that correct?
Yeah, at the moment, Indonesia. So I'm English, but I lived and moved to Australia. It was always a passion of mine. It was a dream of mine to move and live in Australia ever since I was a 15-year-old boy. So I did that in 2016.
Yeah.
And then from 2016, moving forwards, I realized how much I miss my family back over in the UK. And I went through a bit of a mental health rough patch. And I was like, okay, well, how can I be in Australia, a place I love, but also still get the opportunity to still see my family and also maybe travel the world? So 2017, I said to myself, I'm going to start an online business. So just started posting social media, all about breathing, stress, sleep, nutrition, anything health related. But then 2019 really dived into what I'm talking about now on my social media and came up with the concept Performance Through Health. In 2021, just over 15 months ago, after COVID, I felt burnt out in my full-time job and wasn't enjoying it anymore. And like more so psychologically burnt out, not feeling I'm making progress. I'm like, well, if I'm not making progress here, then I may as well start something completely fresh here and see if I can make progress on the other side. So I just went full in online.
Yeah.
And within the space of 12 months, it's really took off, and I've managed to make something where I can, I guess, invest back into the business and I'm ready to start growing and expanding. So it's been an amazing journey to leave Australia, go to Indonesia, travel Europe, see the family, and get to help people with stress, anxiety, burnout online through breath work, through sleep, through stress management, through mindset tactics and talk, and combination of all those different things. It's been amazing.
God, no, well, you said a lot of really great stuff there. I mean, the biggest thing that I'm taking is what I love is like you've got this solid foundation that, we're taught, like, basically it's like the basic curriculum that you learned in school. And I feel like I learned that also from speech pathology and basically practicing, but it isn't until you start living, you start truly applying it. And one of the questions I love to ask is, what is your breath of origin? So sometimes people talk about your family of origin, but for me, it's really what was the part of your breath that just totally broke open your vision and seeing that there's something more. And you really, I mean, you unpacked a lot of that with mental health and like seeing how you can apply it and help other people. And truly what just blows me away is how much the physiology, and also the mental can steal your breath. Literally, I ask clients, like, what's stealing your breath? What is it that's truly just like chipping away? And it's the stressors. It's the everyday stressors. And you've got to identify them. You've got to be aware of them. And then how do we handle them with care with the addition of the breath work? And you're nailing it on the head. Part of the reason I wanted to chat with you is because just the content you're creating is stellar. I mean, like I love that you've got a combination of videos, real life situations, graphs. I love graphs. I love the graphs. I love the research base, and I like that it's both grounded in science and your reality in life. And that's what I think is really cool. Is like when you compare reality with the research, and that's what I think something you're really good at, or at least I've noticed and really appreciated for sure. So with that, I'm glad you took the leap. I'm glad you made the jump. And are you ready for my questions?
Let's go for
I
it.
mean, literally, I'll look at your post and I'm like, I'm gonna ask Martin that. I'm gonna ask him about that. I'm gonna ask him about that. All right. So the first one, I forgot to kind of tell you about it earlier, but I loved how you were talking about the relationship between exercise and sleep. And I don't know what I was thinking here, but I wrote friends with benefits beside it. So anyway, exercise and sleep, both really important. I would love just your take on how they both interact and how they influence each other. And what are you doing in your own personal practice to make sure both are appropriate?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the relationship between exercise and sleep, there's a robust data that suggests that having an exercise habit and routine is very
Yeah.
beneficial for sleep. At the end of the day, we know that one of the mechanisms that sleep is promoted is through the breakdown of energy into adenosine, which then that molecule is increased in the brain, which causes the brain to eventually go into a position where it is not firing as much, so it starts to feel as tired and sleepy. That's the concept of sleep pressure. So those individuals who are not exercising and not utilizing as much energy might not get as much adenosine breakdown and build up into the brain, which doesn't make them feel as sleepy in the evenings. Then there's the relationship of just moving in itself, and the release of endorphins and calming. So overall, having a good exercise routine is good for sleep. However, I recently wrote a blog on this, and there are some people, and there's a personality type of individuals, and a lot of the people who I work with who are very highly stressed. They might be type A personality, and it's about that dopamine hit. It's constantly in achievement. And they carry that across into their training too. High performers outside the gym often want to be high performers, athletes, or might have an athlete background. And it becomes too excessive. If you sway over too much into the sympathetic overdrive, there's too much sympathetic nervous activity and the lack of vagal tone, which we'll talk about later, I'm sure, then that can become challenging to then wind down before sleep. So then we have to look and monitor intensity, volume of exercise to ensure, number one, it's not too excessive.
Yeah.
So then they're not, high levels of cortisol at nighttime and they just can't wind down. That creates a psychological insomnia. Or they're not training too close to their nighttime, to bedtime.
Yeah.
I'm working with a client at the moment, and she loves dancing, but she just said to me, every time I go dancing in the evenings, I don't get back until midnight. And I'm just feeling up here.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, look, that's you're gonna have to find a way to manage that. And we have to manage that and bring it down again. It's similar with people who love exercise.
All right. Well, I was going to say, how do you know what's excessive? Like, how is it basically like just again awareness, paying attention to like how quickly you're able to calm down or wind down and relax. But I always wonder, how do you know what's too much?
I mean, are you having issues with your sleep? That's the first question. Do you feel as if you're not sleeping well? If you're not sleeping well and you're someone who excessively trains and someone who has that type of personality is constantly on the go, then that's something to be mindful of. Is your exercise routine too excessive? Not many people are going to want to admit that because the ego will shy away from that. But the other thing is, okay, do you wake up feeling like you're recovered, or do you feel as if your recovery could be better in the morning when you wake up in the morning? When your alarm goes off, is it like, okay, like I wish I could have a bit more sleep and I'm going to force myself to get out of bed?
Yeah.
They're the two things that I would be identifying if things were too excessive.
Oh, good. Well, and then you actually brought up another point that I wanted to ask you about is I know that you've posted a lot about recovery in general. And can you just walk us through like what does your recovery look like for your workouts to make sure that you're getting adequate sleep? And so and then also when you're talking about recovery, I mean, talking about like meditation, are we talking about like yin yoga? Are we talking about a hot bath or even, I don't know, like just listening to music? Like what are you thinking or what are you referring to as recovery and what does that look like for you?
I mean, everyone's going to be different, and I guess that depends on their needs. But for me, recovery, I'm someone who has previously had a baseline of anxiety. So I know that if I exercise, it can leave me on the edge of feeling like that's high arousal state. So if I then go and do some work after, my ability to concentrate might not be at the level I want it to be. So I will always have 5 to 10 minutes following my workout of slow breathing, whether that's just cadence breathing, 3 seconds in, 6 seconds out, resonant breathing, or sometimes I'll do some what I call control work, which is a form of a hypoventilation, where it's creating a really high air hunger post-workout, but trying to stay with a good breath mechanic in a window of a breath, box breathing, for example. And that will leave me coming out of the gym a lot more clear-minded. And then I would go, and then nutrition is a huge part of recovery. No, I'm not going to dive into nutrition because it's not something that I explore other than talking to people about it. But nutrition is an important part, having the right amount of protein and carbohydrates and food in general. I guess something that could make it relevant to what I do is that if you're not eating enough, then it's a stressor on the body. And if you're eating too much, it's also a stress in terms of it increases inflammation because of obesity. So that's the avenue I take with people with nutrition. Is that you have to get the right balance if you're a stressed individual. But then for me, it's movement and myofascial release that I love, just because I do heavy training. I've been a power lifter or a weightlifter for 15, 16 years, and my joints and muscles and fascia have took a toll on it. So I have to do some kind of either slow yin yoga with myofascial release. But then there are cold showers, heat exposure, meditations, yoga nidra is something that I use when I'm feeling as if, for example, after this, if I can't get on with my work, it's because I'm tired, I'll jump and do a yoga nidra or some form of human calls it non-sleep deep rest as a recovery tool. So they're things I explore.
No, absolutely. And I think it's never one size fits all, and also it's different for all these different scenarios. But you just listed a lot of really great tools. I mean, like choose your pick from all these different breathing exercises that you can utilize. And I think in general, what I'm hearing, like the reoccurring theme is like, you've got to be aware of like, how do you feel? Like realistically checking in, how are you doing? Letting the ego just kind of check itself at the door, because the ego is going to say you're fine when you're not. And because that's going to show weakness. But what I love is really you're integrating awareness of the breath, awareness of our thoughts, awareness of our movements. All of those things I think are so incredibly integral in just living a healthy, full life. And that I think is really cool to hear. And I like that you also brought up cold exposure and saunas, because I really want to try some ice baths, but I literally, okay, so hypothetically, me, but it would be like a really great place to start if you've never taken an ice bath. Literally, I've started like turning on the shower to cold, like turning off the heat completely for like the last like 5-10 seconds to at least like check it out. From a vanity aesthetic point of view, I once heard that it makes your hair shiny if you have cold showers. I was like, I can do it for 5 or 10 seconds, but I would love, I mean, the more I'm reading, I'm like, all right, I need to try this. So how do you start? I mean, do I just grab a bag of ice and stick it in my tub, or what do I do?
I mean, not really. I think this is where you have to look at the individual with this and go, what's the goal of the purpose of the ice? Because there's different strategies for different things, recovery, resilience, or metabolic changes. But generally, most people nowadays want to do cold shower to get over that challenge and the resistance of doing it. And that's what I get people to kind of look at. And it's like, okay, if you look at the idea of the cold shower being something that's a hurdle that you have to overcome, then can we just make one hurdle and overcome that hurdle to begin with? And that means just stand underneath it and switching it on. And then it might be, okay, right, we've done one hurdle. What's the next hurdle? Well, the next hurdle is 15 seconds, or until you get that urge in yourself that you want to leave. Can you then stay for a little bit longer by regulating your breath, calming the breath down, and then celebrate the fact you managed to reach 2 hurdles this time? And look at it in a way of like a mental aspect of the individual themselves is stepping over a hurdle and overcoming that hurdle, and they're going to celebrate each time. and that creates an internal sense of achievement. But also it doesn't always put a time frame on it, because imagine, let's say, just hypothetically, you're in a relationship, you do cold showers all the time, you manage to get to a minute, or you do a cold bath and you manage to get to a minute, but then you have an argument with your partner, a huge argument, bust up, and then the following day you're really highly stressed, you jump in there and you just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And you can only get 15 seconds. But if you look at them as hurdles, it removes the time element. When you remove that time element, then all of a sudden the external stress that can impact your ability to stay in stressful environments, it doesn't have that time effect of saying I have to be here for this. It's just literally each day to day.
Okay. I was going to say, no, I just know this is brilliant. And what I would say is, are you sure you're not a therapist? Because the way that you've been able to break down the task. So the task is cold shower, but you've been able to make it into such manageable bites and steps that it's impossible.
Yeah,
it's impossible
I use
to
the concept
fail.
of I use the concept of exposure therapy. So I've read a lot of psychology in the background, not formally, but like I went through depression and mental health issues, and I was too ashamed to go to see a psychologist. So I studied for maybe 3 or 4 years, and I looked at CBT, I looked at exposure therapy, I looked into everything. So I now use that. I use those tools. I use them with breath. I use them with cold. I use them with I have a client at the moment who's grieving and she's struggling to get out of bed. It's like, okay, can you just get out of bed and just send me a message every 8 a.m. to say that you're out of bed at 8 a.m. Like that's the start of your coaching together.
Yeah.
So I'm integrating the psychology with the physiology.
Well, but that's everything. I mean, I tell my clients that, this is a closed system. Mind and body are completely connected. We're totally going to go into vagus nerve after this, because that's, how can you not, when you're talking about mind and body? And then 2, life is our greatest teacher. I honestly, what I've just found like so incredibly resonant, and then just profoundly coming through in everyone that I've talked to and everyone that I'm just interacting with as I'm emerging into like this breathing space, is that we're all just trying to feel okay in our body, and we're all just trying to search for tools that help us like understand who we are, why we're here, what we're doing, all these things. And essentially there's no greater tool than my testimonial of like, this is what I did and it helped me. I mean, granted, it feels good to have the educational and the medical background, and I'm sure along with you, but to me, it's that personal testimony of human to human, breath to breath connection of like, listen, this was what I was struggling with, because you build community, because you build trust. And I'm just listening to your process, and that's what's resonating and really shining through the most to me, is you 100% are giving them a personal testimony as well as like a professional and scientific background as well. And that to me is money. Like that, well, not money, I mean money in the sense of like the gold. That's what we're going for, because I mean, we just want things that we know someone else has tried and works, and then to knowing that it's so individualized and targeted for that specific person, because your stressors are going to be there might be some overlap, but your stressors are going to be so much different than mine, and mine will be different than the person beside me. And while there's some things that we can do, like, all right, you all try this exercise, you really need to hone it in and make it personalized for that specific person, because what makes that person's breath skip or hold or chest tighten or throat close is going to be different for another person. And you're really doing a great job of integrating the anatomy, the biology, the physiology with the psychology as well. And that was a really long compliment. So great job.
Thank you.
Great job. And then, like I was saying, let's talk vagus nerve. So literally mind body connector, vagus nerve, longest nerve that we have. I definitely talk a lot about with my clients is vagal tone and vagal stimulation. And I mean, my favorite exercise is nasal unblocking, where I'll have them breathe in, breathe out, hold, and nod. And they're like, nod in my head. I'm like, yes, we've got to at least activate your vagus nerve somehow, even if we're going side to side, if we're humming something. So I would love just to know, like, what are your go-to, what are your favorite ways of activating clients' vagus nerves? Give us some tools, Martin.
I think when it comes to the vagus nerve, it's one of the most misunderstood nerves.
Okay.
I think people they think about it and they think of relaxation, because increasing vagal tone and yes, having that vagal break is what it's doing. But
Right.
really, the vagus nerve is actually detecting sensory information and sending that back to the brain. So through the manipulation of the things that we're actually doing, we're not actually activating parasympathetic nervous activity. We're tricking the vagus nerve into believing that we are safe and in a state of rest, and therefore sending signals to turn the back to create parasympathetic nervous activity. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Because
Say
it's
more.
afferent. It's afferent, like primarily it's afferent, so it's carrying messages back up to the brain, and
Right.
therefore we have to use action or movement or change something to create a stimulus that increases vagal tone.
Okay. So
That's where the manipulation comes in. So the movement
yeah.
of the neck, or as some people say, you can massage the ears. You have to change the breath. You have to focus on more prolonged exhale breathing, because that's going to, what's that going to do to the rib cage? The rib cage is going to get smaller. The heart is going to get a little bit smaller. The blood pressure in the heart is going to increase. So the body then goes, oh, the blood pressure is a bit high in the heart. We want to keep cardiac output the same. We're going to lower the heart rate by increasing vagal tone. So it's not the vagus nerve stimulating the heart to slow it down. It's the vagal tone increasing, reducing sympathetic activity in the heart. And then when we do movement and massage, and we do slow things, massaging the gut area, we're massaging areas that maybe are innervated by the vagus nerve, but that's just sending signals back up to the brain when it relaxes, and the brain then cares we're more in a relaxed position, so we're going to reduce the vagal tone.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm just thinking, because I really love the idea of like breath work, yoga, movement being bottom up approach, and then meditation being top down. But essentially the vagus tone, like vagus nerve, vagus tone, all these vagal activities, they're all originated from somewhere like below the neck, but I don't know, but then the ears, that's not below the neck. I don't know. I was just thinking how it's a one way.
I don't know how much science there is to the ears. I think they are.
maybe it just feels good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is more right. I think that's just the behavioral side of things that I've studied. We touch the face and we touch the ears and stuff when we want to soothe ourselves.
Oh,
when we want to feel right.
Am I soothing myself right now? Yeah.
No, if you were to interview someone, and you do, like on the podcast, when you were first introducing me, I was even looking at myself, I was touching my nose, I was doing this. It's an unconscious thing that we do. And I think just as a child, you just kind of like play with your ears, and I think that's just kind of it has that calming effect. And I don't know whether there's enough scientific evidence to suggest that it is definitely increasing vagal tone.
Well, let's put a call out. Whoever can let us know if rubbing the ears is increasing vagal tone, much appreciated. That's fascinating. So do you know like the parable, the boy who cried wolf? But have you ever heard of that before? It doesn't have anything to do with science, but it kind of reminds me of like the opposite. The vagus nerve is basically the nerve that cried relax or something like that. Huh. No, I love that. That's really great. And then just curious, how far down in the body can we go to actually stimulate the vagus nerve? Do you know? Like, can we do things?
I'm not 100% sure, because I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in fascia, but I think the fascia is connected, and maybe there is stuff maybe in the bottom of the feet, but I don't know whether that's innervated by the vagus nerve, or whether that's sympathetic or parasympathetic innervation. I can identify those points. Probably you'd want to talk to Jill Miller about that. She'd be an expert to talk on that sort of stuff.
Yeah, give me
But
your contact. But no, well,
but
what you just said about the fascia, actually the same line of fascia that lines the tongue, that wraps all the way around the tongue, is the same line of fascia that goes all the way down to our toes.
yeah,
So, I mean, just
I know the fascia is directly linked to in the autonomic nervous system, and you know, when we are doing myofascial work, we're basically doing self-awareness and emotional work at the same time, and people don't really put the two and two together.
Well, you just you just basically told me who I need to interview next, so thanks. Thanks for that. Okay, there was one thing I wanted to make sure I asked you about, because like the whole process itself, especially with essentially it talked about how like the diaphragm can get fatigued, and please let me pronounce this correctly, but respiratory metaboroflex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a complicated term. Beautiful scientists
is.
always trying to make things. The other word is respiratory blood stealing.
Blood stealing. Oh my God, blood stealing.
They could have just used that term and made it a lot easier for people.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, please, if you could just like break this down. And there's an excellent post that you did. I think it's like the most recent one on your Instagram feed. But I could tell, especially what really piqued my interest is when you were talking about the diaphragm fatiguing and then what takes over after that. Like that, just say more.
Yeah, so this takes me back to when I first got into the breath, essentially, maybe around 2008, 2009. I started working with a PhD student who was looking at diaphragm fatigue and looking at how much breathing itself during exercise creates fatigue, or whether it's the movement and the breathing together, and then whether we could use inspiratory muscle training to decrease that fatigue. Yeah. But essentially what happens is when we are exercising above, I think it's when you have a ventilation above around about 60 or 70% of your maximum ventilation. Okay. After 5 to 10 minutes, the output that your diaphragm, the contraction or the ability to diaphragm contract will start to reduce because it becomes fatigue. You get an increase in metabolites, which, like any other muscle, will fatigue it. If that continues for a long period of time, then again, afferent signals will send information back up to the brain to say, like, our diaphragm is fatiguing. Okay, so we need more oxygen sent to the diaphragm because it's more important to breathe than it is to run in that situation. Yeah. Because it's better to survive it's better to survive by breathing than it is to try and escape. You know, right. You're screwed if you're in a predator prey situation because you get hunted down, but the overall thing is more important to breathe. So then what it does is that information is sent to the blood vessels of the locomotion muscles, the legs, the arms, whatever's working, and those blood vessels are constricted, and the blood is then redistributed back to the diaphragm, so the diaphragm can continue to work. So it's like a circular motion, basically. The diaphragm fatigues as it does. Yep. Because it's working, and then the body the build up of metabolites is then is signaled back to the brain. Okay, we're getting a build up of metabolites in the diaphragm here. All right, we need more blood, we need more oxygen to go. We need to be able to get those metabolites back down again so the diaphragm continue to work. So we're going to steal that from the peripheries, and therefore the diaphragm is going to be able to use to continue its work. Now, we can probably attenuate or reduce the effect of that through breathing training. I would say that nasal breathers will probably be better at doing that than mouth breathers, just because of the ventilator efficiency. In fact, in elite endurance athletes, it's been shown that is already reduced just through their training, and that's probably just from the sustained amount of training that they do. It's just an adaptation. But those who are more ventilator efficient will be even better. We can also do this with inspiratory muscle training. So, resistive elements of basically using weight training for your diaphragm and your inspiratory muscles, devices that have a resistance on that you can breathe through.
Well, that was what I was going to ask. It's like, so basically, the best way that I know to at least like help clients understand like where their diaphragm is I'll have them breathe in, breathe out, seal their lips, pinch their nose, and then actively try to breathe in just to contract the diaphragm alone. But then I was going to ask you, it's like, so how do we how do we provide resistance training to the diaphragm, since this is our main muscle of respiration? And it's essentially, and specifically, I'm thinking of like older clients that I have that are dealing like with arthritis and just in general, like how do I break this down even more? And then to patients with long COVID that maybe their diaphragms have just not had a whole lot of work, or they're just their whole body's under distress. But I definitely, I have seen, I can't remember the name of it, but I have seen what you're talking about, where basically it's a mouthpiece that you put in and it slows down the resistance to it. So that's one way. Are there any other ways?
Yeah, I mean, it's not where you have to go directly to it, because that's it's an external device that you have to purchase. But if you've got elderly people, especially people with COPD, that phenomena of the respiratory metabolic reflex might actually happen whilst they're working, because of the nature of the increased work of breathing through COPD itself, but or asthma, let's say.
Yeah.
But nasal breathing is the first place you would start. You're increasing resistance, and you're increasing the activation of that diaphragm. Therefore, you might get a training effect on the diaphragm itself. So if someone has some form of dysfunctional breathing, particularly if they're elderly, and they might have some form of weakness occurring in their diaphragm or their breathing muscles in general, is trying to get appropriate breathing mechanics through and nasal breathing, focusing on that area of trying to let go of these secondary muscles and utilizing more of the primary muscles. That's going to be the first benefit, because then you just through training alone, you're going to get stimulus on the diaphragm, which is going to help develop that muscle. And the diaphragm is primarily, I think, it's about 82% type 1 muscle fibers. So it's an endurance. It's for endurance. So it's evolved to be utilized every single day, to continue to be used every day until the day you die. So it's got to be an endurance muscle at the end of the day. So it doesn't need really heavy resistance.
Right.
Another thing you can do, and this is something that I do myself, is at the end of your training sessions, when you're blowing a bit harder, is maybe just go to single nostril breathing, increase the resistance further. I do it when I'm in a wall squat. So I'll do a wall squat, and I'm like, okay, right now I'm in a position where I'm having to activate my core a little bit. I'm having to hold my legs, and I'm going to try and nasal breathe, but I'm going to try and nasal breathe and really calm that down. See if I can do 5 long, slow breaths in and out of one nostril, and then 5 on the other. And it adds a psychological element to it, because your legs start to fatigue out. But can you stay calm in your breath and still stay controlled through your breathing whilst under stress in your legs? And then it becomes a bit of an attrition of, can you stay focused on your breathing rather than your legs being in pain, which is not going to be ideal for, you've seen other people, but for people.
Yeah, then I was going to say, are you doing specifically like left side to get more of your parasympathetic, or right side?
This is just focusing on purely trying to add resistance and add an element of, I guess, making it hard to breathe. If you get someone to do a wall squat, and then you get someone to do a wall squat whilst trying to focus on single nostril breathing.
Are you talking about like
just sitting against the wall?
Yeah, a wall
hold.
Yeah.
A wall hold, yeah.
Yeah.
Just sitting against the wall at the end of a session when your legs are pretty tired. And you just say, right, if you should try to do a minute doing that, but then try to do a minute single nostril breathe and slowing your breath down, you've added an element of, can I stay focused on the breath, be in control of the breath, and also be a bit mindful of the pain, but like separate the pain with using the breath.
Can we call this the Martin hold, the Martin one nostril hold or something?
Yeah, I love it. Honestly, it's honestly, I love. Yeah, of course you can. Yeah. Okay. I love doing it.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And then what you just kind of alluded to, and what I was really thinking about, is like the different grades of resistance. So this, it's like zero resistance. This is a little bit more. This is a little bit more, and then this is the top. Yeah.
And then you get the inspiratory muscle devices that you can actually change, which add further resistance.
So those go in your mouth, I guess.
Yeah, they are devices that are just like if you were to go scuba diving or you had a snorkel, you just have them in your mouth, and then they have a spring-loaded resistance on there, or some of them are electronic now, and they just change the I guess the strength of that you're training at. So when you breathe against it, you can really just feel your diaphragm can really opening up. Even the issue is that you do start to pull in your secondary breathing muscles. So if you've got someone with poor breathing mechanics and you put them straight onto that, then they just go.
Right.
And it's just not, you're just training a poor habit. So you do have to create the correct habit first. But then you've got the training masks that are oxygen advantage training masks. They're adding a little bit of resistance. I don't know how much resistance they add to increase the strength of the diaphragm, but they are going to create some form of efficiency within the breathing of the diaphragm.
And just something that, like, I guess part of the reason I haven't really looked necessarily into those oral devices is because I always want the tongue up. I always want the tongue up. I always want the lips closed. I always want the jaw unclenched. I want the nose, all nose, all nose. I mean, granted, we have both, so we don't die if this isn't working great. But I guess part of my confusion of like how that's working is how is that helping to promote your tongue up? Because if your tongue's up, you have to breathe through your nose. But then I guess their main focus is you're looking specifically to the muscle of the diaphragm itself. I don't know.
Yeah. And
anyway,
they were initially made for helping people with their diaphragmatic issues in the clinical world. They weren't in the sporting field. They've realized that there was a benefit there eventually, but initially it was to do with clinical COPD, asthma, those sort of things. So it was like, this is a targeted training thing that can help you with that. Not considering people with dysfunctional breathing patterns and the effect that can have on there and what it might do to the tongue. Like, they haven't gone into that whole exploration of that. It's just, you get a researcher that finds one thing that's an issue. Can I solve that issue? And then they become an expert in that field, not looking at everything globally like other people might do.
Well, and then too, what I find so fascinating is when I was just practicing speech pathology, it was very much like the world of speech pathology. We saw it very much in like this silo. And then I slowly kind of moved into the world of oral facial myofunctional therapy. And there's a little bit of overlap, but there very much was like the viewpoint and the sphere of like, we talk about things in the myofunctional therapy. And then I added yoga. So then there's like this other silo of yoga, and then breath work, which this other silo. I'm like, why are there's so much overlap and we're saying so many of the same things, just using different vocabulary. And what I love is just basically connecting it. So I would love to try, like, if anyone wants to send me an oral respiratory trainer, I'd love to try one and give it my go. And I would love to increase my diaphragmatic use, but it's you use in moderation and not make it your ongoing pattern. So patterns, awareness, all of those I think are super important. Okay, I just had a couple more questions and then I'll let you go because I want to be respectful of your time. Eustress versus distress. Eustress spelled EUSTRESS versus distress. You're the first person I've ever even heard use this term. I saw it on one of your posts, and again was like asking Martin about this. Can you just describe a little bit about what is eustress? And of course, we know what distress is, but their relationship to each other.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm definitely not the first person to talk about it. I think you've just come across
you're the first person that you're the first person that I've seen.
I don't want to claim that. Look, eustress. I mean,
so what is eustress?
The word stress nowadays has been, I guess, tainted by the idea of what it might mean in the long term, or to have chronic stress, or to say I'm stressed. But really, there's two aspects here: is that we need some stress, otherwise we wouldn't get out of bed. You wouldn't do anything with your life. You just wouldn't have any arousal to do anything at all. We would have no energy, and you wouldn't be able to do anything. So a small bit of the stress, or low to moderate parts of stress, or depending how resilient you are and how much tolerance you have to stress, drive you to take action. It drives you to go out and motivate yourself in the world. It drives you to move forward towards your vision. We're forward moving creatures. Yeah. We wouldn't survive. It drives evolution. It's simple as that. That's what stress does. So if we're to put ourselves into a situation where we are stepping a little bit out of our comfort zone, but it's not so much that we can recover from it. For example, when we train during exercise, when we go into an ice bath, when we go into the hot showers or the steam rooms, we are adding a bit of stress to our body, maybe physiologically, maybe psychologically, and then we're taking ourselves back to a place where we can recover. That little bit of stress is a eustress. It's making you adapt and change and evolve and improve, if you want to use those terms.
Right.
However, there's a time or a place or where it becomes too excessive. And when it becomes too excessive, then we go too far, we do too much, or it's just the trauma, the incident itself is so much it creates trauma, then it becomes distress. And that basically means that it's not having your body's not able to adapt fast enough and recover from it fast enough for it to have a positive net benefit, let's say. It becomes more of a breakdown. You go into the rules of entropy rather than adaptation and growth. And that's really, when you're looking at eustress, you'd say, okay, it's a positive form of stress. Right. And distress is, I don't like to label things positive and negative, but it's more of a negative form of stress.
Well, no, you described that beautifully, and just something I want to ask if I'm on the right track. So essentially, it's like eustress is resilience training. Like eustress is like the amount of stress needed to be able to then recover. Mm-hmm. And then to me, it kind of reminds me of like eustress is like you get a cut, you're able to like have a scab and then heal, and then you move on. And distress is just you're getting cut after cut after cut after cut after cut, and you're never able to recover and heal.
Yeah, and there's an element of choice in there as well.
Yeah.
You know, if something happens to you and you weren't expecting it, then your nervous system is going to respond differently if you used to step into the environment and do it yourself. And this is one of the crazy things about human beings, is that conscious choice can create a difference in the outcome that you get when it comes to stressful environments.
So are you thinking like the eustress, like those are the conscious choices, like to go into an ice bath, like to go train, and then
I firmly believe that the Wim Hof method, a lot of it is around choice and belief. And it's like you're going through there, and as you go through with that choice and belief, and you've got an authority figure telling you that's going to be okay, you go through self-hypnosis and suggestion, and you tell yourself it's going to be okay. And as that's happening, your nervous system is getting wired through plasticity with more positivity than fear. And you're essentially, that's what resilience is. It's being able to look at things and go, I can overcome that, rather than being, that's too much, I can't go towards it.
Yeah. Oh, I think I love eustress. I love choice. I love eustress. I mean, no, that was so much more than I really was thinking about. But basically, conscious choices to make us stronger. Conscious choices of testing our ability to overcome the presented stressful situation in a safe environment. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Oh, I was going to ask you about a CO2 set point, but okay, I'll ask you about a CO2 set point, and then I'll let you go. But I don't know. I love it when there's a little bit more of like grit and bite and like application to the life. You're like, oh my gosh, like eustress versus distress is basically a metaphor for life. Like, what are the choices that we're actively making to make sure that we're going to be okay, setting ourselves up for success, versus what are the things that are just placed on us without our control and without our permission. And then I think it's basically the eustress training that we do that allows us to handle the distress, unless there's so much that it's unsurmountable. Anyway, I'm gonna have to think about that a little bit later. So thank you for explaining that. And then last question. So the CO2 set point, I'd seen one of your references basically talking about like CO2 tolerance, basically like when we hyperventilate, so upper chest breathing, getting into like those anxiety circles, and when we start breathing very quickly, our CO2 tolerance is dropping, meaning that we're basically unable to tolerate that time in between each breath. So we breathe quicker, breathing in more and more oxygen. And I think that's what you had, like, that's where I first saw you reference talking about your CO2 set point changes. Are you basically talking about like your CO2 baseline, or like the baseline of where you are having normal respiration, needing to take that next inhalation?
I think, I mean, it's just a bit more of a generic term that I like to use that. I mean, if you're to hook someone up to a capnography, or you're measuring gas by gas analysis, you are going to have a certain point where CO2 creates a threshold change in their breathing, and that's going to vary amongst people. So I'm kind of looking at that point there, really. But there's a few considerations that we need to make in terms of the CO2 set point, is that it is just a generic term, and that unless we have something on it, we can't identify what it is, but we can potentially shift it through training or through exercise, high intensity exercise and lactate threshold training and stuff. But we can also shift it through breath work, breath holds. And we are looking at CO2 tolerance slightly here. And then it's just going to vary on individual to individual. We know that potentially CO2 is linked to when it gets to a certain point in the brain, the pH becomes dangerous and that can trigger panic and create an internal panic alarm. And that is now starting to be linked potentially to a driver of anxiety through Justin Feinstein's work. And there's some older psychoanalysts and respiratory psychoanalysts and mind-body connective work guys, a guy called Ernest Rossi, who back in the 90s suggested that CO2 and pH is a state memory molecule. So essentially what that means is that, and this is going off Carl Jung's work, is that physiology itself drives psychology, and the changes in our physiology, particularly at the level of the breath, is what drives our psychology. And we have psychological triggers. So for example, if we were to learn something, if there was a traumatic incident and we were to learn, you put your hand on a stove and you have that reaction that instantly you learn that gets embedded into your unconscious mind. That gets embedded at a physiological kind of set point. And that set point is through the pH or CO2 level that you had at that current point. And people can get put underneath hypnosis. They can recall traumatic memories, and it will basically change their breathing and they won't even know. And it will change their CO2, and that CO2 is basically it's a memory molecule in the whole body, potentially. Now, this has not been proven by modern day science, but the mechanisms of it look like it's moving towards and trending towards that way.
I want to say, like, holy shit, like, what?
Yeah,
whoa.
yeah. And they look into the work of Ernest Rossi. He's a Jungian psychoanalyst who is delved into some amazing mechanisms. And if anything, I think it gives us a mechanism, if it's not fully truthful, like the polyvagal theory of Stephen Porges, that there's things we can pick out there and say it's not perfect, but it gives us a therapeutic model to work with people. And I think that's what Ernest Rossi does very well with his work.
Well, I don't think something has to be perfect to still be useful and helpful. And by all means, like, I 100% am going to look into Mr. Ernest Rossi and some of his research for sure, because just blew my mind open, Martin. That's pretty incredible. I so appreciate you being here. I so appreciate you waking up early to chat with me. I want to make sure I plug Performance Through Health. That is your Facebook, your Instagram, also the name of your podcast and your website. Now, people can follow you and all of those, as well as your YouTube videos. Literally, if you're ready to learn more about science, the science of breath, the science of respiration, stress, sleep, all those things together, definitely you have been a wonderful resource for me. And I so appreciate you sharing your knowledge. And then what are you excited about? What are you working on? How do we help support you? What can we advocate? Plug some Martin.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a few things that I'm working on that I can't quite talk about just yet, just from NDAs. But there's a lot of excitement in the background that I'm working on in terms of, I guess, I call them courses, certifications, that sort of stuff, to really, I guess, take what I know in terms of the breath, how that interlinks with sleep, how it interlinks with stress, and also the psychological nervous system side, integrating all that together. To try and make it in people can go through courses without actually having to need me, so it's a bit more cost effective for people, and also for people who are professionals wanting to learn more about how to utilize these tools to help people with their mind and their body. So there's two things that's working on at the moment.
All right, well,
I'm super excited.
I was going to say, I mean, I would be too. Mostly just congratulations, and for what you've been able to accomplish since 2017, 2019, and 2021. Just keep going.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And I appreciate the talk today.
Oh, Oh, I do as well. So with that, thank you so much. I'm going to wrap this up and appreciate your time. Bye.